Good Friday, April 14th, 1865. The air in Washington, D.C. was thick with the scent of spring and the heady perfume of victory. 4 long, agonizing years of civil war had finally ended. General Lee's surrender at Appomattox just days before had ushered in an era of unprecedented hope, a fragile peace that President Abraham Lincoln, weary but resolute, sought to mend. That evening, seeking a moment of respite and celebration, Lincoln and his wife Mary Todd attended a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Unbeknownst to them, lurking in the shadows, a viper was coiled. John Wilkes Booth, a celebrated actor and fervent Confederate sympathizer, harbored a venomous hatred for the president he considered a tyrant. For weeks, Booth had meticulously planned a grand conspiracy, initially aimed at kidnapping Lincoln, but now, fueled by despair over the Southern defeat, his intent had darkened to murder. He believed that by striking down the president, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward, he could throw the Union government into chaos and reignite the Southern cause. At approximately 10:15 p.m., as the play reached one of its most humorous lines, Booth slipped into the presidential box. The laughter of the audience, the joy of the moment, provided the perfect cover. With a Derringer pistol clutched in his hand, he fired a single, fatal shot into the back of Lincoln's head. The crack of the gun, though muffled by the applause, ripped through the fabric of American history, a sound that would echo through generations. Chaos erupted. Major Henry Rathbone, a guest in the box, lunged at Booth, but the assassin slashed him with a knife before leaping from the box to the stage below. As he landed, his spur caught on a flag, breaking his left leg, yet he rose, shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, and vanished into the wings. A waiting horse carried him into the night, leaving behind a nation plunged into an incomprehensible nightmare. The mortally wounded president was carried across 10th Street to the Peterson House, a modest boarding home, where doctors worked feverishly but fruitlessly through the night. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, a man of iron will, immediately seized control, transforming the grief-stricken capital into a command center. He dispatched telegraphs, mobilized the military, and initiated what would become one of the largest manhunts in American history. As dawn broke on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, the savior of the Union, breathed his last. The country was orphaned, and the hunt for his killer intensified with a ferocity born of national anguish. The trail of John Wilkes Booth, accompanied by his co-conspirator David Harold, led them southeast through Maryland. Their first desperate stop was the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, a local physician who, whether complicit or simply treating a stranger, splinted Booth's broken leg. This brief respite provided the assassins with temporary relief, but it also left a crucial piece of evidence for their pursuers. Mudd would later claim ignorance, but his actions would forever entangle him in the conspiracy. The pursuit was relentless. Secretary Stanton offered a staggering reward of $100,000 for Booth's capture, dead or alive, a sum equivalent to millions today, ensuring that every soldier, detective, and citizen was on high alert. Thousands of Union cavalry and detectives scoured the Maryland countryside, fanning out in every direction, following every lead, no matter how tenuous. They were closing in inch by agonizing inch. Booth and Harold, enduring immense pain and fear, navigated dense pine thickets and muddy swamps, relying on the clandestine network of Confederate sympathizers for shelter and sustenance. Their journey was a testament to their desperation, hiding by day, traveling by night, their movements shrouded in secrecy, their identities increasingly compromised. They crossed the Potomac River into Virginia on April 22, believing they might find safer haven among the remnants of the Confederacy. But the long arm of the law was not to be outrun. Led by Lieutenant Edward P. Dougherty of the 16th New York Cavalry, a detachment of 26 soldiers, acting on intelligence gathered by Detective Lafayette Baker, tracked the fugitives to Richard Garrett's farm near Port Royal, Virginia. It was the night of April 25, 12 days after Lincoln's assassination. The chase was nearing its dramatic, violent conclusion. As the cavalry surrounded Garrett's tobacco barn, where Booth and Harold were hiding, the air crackled with tension. Harold, terrified, quickly surrendered. But Booth, ever the defiant actor, refused to come out. He shouted challenges, daring the soldiers to enter, proclaiming he would not be taken alive. The standoff stretched on, illuminated by the pale moonlight and the rising fear. Lieutenant Doherty, unwilling to risk his men in a direct assault, ordered the barn to be set ablaze. Flames quickly consumed the dry tobacco leaves, forcing Booth into a desperate corner. As the inferno raged, lighting up the night sky, Booth could be seen limping inside, a pistol in one hand, a carbine in the other. He shuffled towards the barn door, silhouetted against the fire, seemingly preparing for a final suicidal charge. Then, with chilling precision, a single shot rang out. Sergeant Boston Corbett, a devoutly religious man with a reputation for eccentricity, had spotted Booth through a crack in the barn wall and fired his Colt revolver, striking Booth in the neck, just below his ear. The bullet severed his spinal cord, paralyzing him. Booth collapsed, his final act of defiance extinguished by a single unexpected bullet. The soldiers dragged the dying assassin from the burning barn and laid him on the porch of Garrett's farmhouse. He lingered for several hours, his body convulsing, unable to move, only able to whisper, "Tell my mother I die for my country." His last intelligible words, reportedly, were useless, useless. At approximately 7 a.m. on April 26, 1865, John Wilkes Booth, the man who had plunged America into mourning, drew his last breath. The body was swiftly transported back to Washington, D.C. for a secret autopsy and identification. Secretary Stanton, ever efficient and determined, ensured the official confirmation was beyond doubt. Multiple individuals, including physicians and those who knew Booth, identified the remains. The assassin was dead. The government's declaration, widely disseminated, brought a collective sigh of relief across the Union. The intense manhunt was over. The official narrative was clear. John Wilkes Booth, the architect of the Lincoln assassination, had been hunted down and killed. His co-conspirators were rounded up, tried by a military commission, and swiftly punished, with 4 of them, including Mary Surratt, David Harold, Lewis Powell, and George Atzerodt, hanged on July 7, 1865. The nation, still reeling from the war and Lincoln's death, accepted this verdict as closure, as justice served. The story of Booth's demise at Garrett's farm became the definitive account, enshrined in history books, a testament to the swift and unforgiving hand of American justice. The assassin was dead, and the Union could finally begin the long, arduous process of healing. Or so it seemed. The desperate flight of John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, culminated in the early hours of April 26, 1865. For 12 grueling days, the full might of the Union government had been arrayed against him, a relentless pursuit that finally cornered its quarry at Richard Garrett's tobacco farm near Port Royal, Virginia. As the pre-dawn mist clung to the fields, a detachment of the 16th New York Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Edward P. Doherty, surrounded the wooden barn where Booth and his accomplice, David Harold, lay hidden. The air was thick with tension, the scent of damp earth mingling with the unspoken promise of a violent end. The cavalrymen demanded surrender. Harold, terrified, emerged from the barn, hands raised, a picture of abject defeat. But Booth, the theatrical conspirator, remained defiant, refusing to yield. A standoff ensued, punctuated by threats and curses exchanged through the barn walls. When all efforts to coax him out failed, the barn was set ablaze, the dry tobacco leaves igniting quickly, casting flickering shadows against the night sky. As the flames licked higher, illuminating the desperate scene, a single shot rang out. Sergeant Boston Corbett, acting against orders, had fired his carbine through a crack in the wall, striking the man inside. The figure, paralyzed by the shot, was dragged from the smoldering ruin, laid out on the Garrett farmhouse porch. His last whispered words, "Useless, useless," echoed the perceived futility of his final act. Within hours, the man believed to be John Wilkes Booth was dead. The official narrative was swift and conclusive. Justice had been served. The nation, still reeling from Lincoln's assassination, could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. But even as the news spread, a chilling undercurrent of doubt began to ripple through the shadows, a suspicion born from the very circumstances of that grim morning. For generations, the official account of Booth's death has been etched into history, a neat conclusion to a national tragedy. Yet, when one peels back the layers of that frantic dawn, a disconcerting pattern of inconsistencies emerges, suggesting a story far more complex, perhaps even deliberately obscured. The first tremor of doubt originates from the very act of the shooting itself. Sergeant Boston Corbett, the self-proclaimed avenger, offered multiple, often contradictory accounts of how and why he fired his fatal shot. At times he claimed divine inspiration, at others that Booth had raised his weapon, though no such action was corroborated by others present. Some soldiers insisted they saw no gun raised, while others stated Corbett fired without warning. This immediate lack of a cohesive, undisputed narrative from the scene itself is the first red flag, an unsettling prelude to the events that followed. The bullet, it was said, struck the man in the neck, severing his spinal cord, causing instant paralysis. While the wound's effect was clear, the precision of such a shot, in the chaos of a burning barn, through a narrow crack by a man known for his erratic behavior, stretched credulity for some. Was it a lucky shot, or something more deliberate, designed to ensure the target could not speak? These initial questions, however faint, were quickly swept aside in the urgency to confirm the identity of the dead man. The body, still warm, was loaded onto a wagon and transported to the USS Montauk, anchored in the Potomac River. There, on the shadowy deck of the Monitor, a hasty identification process began. A small group of individuals, including Dr. John Frederick May, who had once treated Booth for a tumor, and Charles Dawson, a clerk at Ford's Theater who knew Booth, were brought in. Their testimony, based on facial features and the distinctive broken leg Booth had sustained during his escape, formed the cornerstone of the official identification. Yet this was hardly the rigorous, unimpeachable verification one would expect for the most wanted man in America. The conditions were poor, the light dim, and the pressure immense. Crucially, no proper, independent autopsy was performed. In an era where medical science was advancing, and for a figure of such immense national importance, the omission of a thorough examination is glaring. Dr. May's examination was cursory, focused primarily on the bullet wound. Details such as Booth's known distinctive tattoos, specifically the initials J.W. on his hand, were either overlooked, not recorded, or, as some later claimed, simply not present on the body. This absence of a meticulous record, a detailed inventory of distinguishing marks, leaves an enormous void in the official account, a void eagerly filled by suspicion. Why the haste? Why the lack of due diligence? Was it simply a desire for swift closure, or something more calculated? The peculiar handling of the remains further deepened the mystery. The body, once identified, was not released to Booth's family, nor was it given a public burial. Instead, it was shrouded in secrecy, becoming a phantom even in death. From the Montauk it was transferred to the Washington Arsenal, where it was initially placed in a secure cell, then reportedly buried in an unmarked grave within the Arsenal penitentiary grounds. This clandestine disposal, performed under the cloak of darkness and extreme secrecy, was unprecedented for a figure of such notoriety. The official justification for such secrecy was to prevent Booth's grave from becoming a shrine for Confederate sympathizers. But the extent of the measures taken, the multiple reburials, the shifting locations, the rumors of the body being weighted and sunk in the Potomac, all paint a picture of an administration not merely preventing veneration, but actively obscuring the very existence, and indeed the definitive identity of the deceased. Over the subsequent decades, the body's whereabouts became a source of constant speculation, with various exhumations and reburials occurring, each adding new layers of confusion rather than clarity. The official records regarding these movements were often vague, incomplete, or contradictory. The sum of these inconsistencies, these shadows of doubt, forms a compelling counter-narrative. Conflicting eyewitness accounts of the shooting, a rushed identification under less than ideal conditions, the astonishing absence of a proper autopsy, and the subsequent secretive, almost paranoid handling of the body, each element, taken individually, might be dismissed as an oversight of a chaotic time. But when woven together, they paint a disturbing picture. They suggest a deliberate effort to erase, or at least obfuscate, the true identity of the man killed at Garrett's farm. Was the government so desperate to close the chapter on the assassination that it accepted a convenient narrative without thorough verification, or was there a deeper, more sinister motive? Could Booth have possessed information that, if revealed in a public trial, would have implicated powerful figures beyond the immediate circle of conspirators? A dead Booth, definitively identified or not, could tell no tales. The official story provided a measure of closure for a grieving nation, but for those who looked closer, it left a gaping wound of unanswered questions. Questions that continue to echo across the centuries, whispering the unsettling possibility that the man who died on Garrett's porch was not John Wilkes Booth at all. The shadows of doubt, cast by the very evidence, or lack thereof, from that fateful morning, linger still. The official story is etched into the very bedrock of American history. On April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. 12 days later, cornered in a tobacco barn on Richard Garrett's farm near Port Royal, Virginia, Booth was shot and killed by Sergeant Boston Corbett, a zealous Union soldier. His body was identified, buried, then reburied, and the nation began the arduous process of healing from its deepest wound. Case closed, or was it? From the very moment of his alleged death, a whisper began to spread, a persistent, unsettling undercurrent that defied the tidy resolution offered by the War Department. What if the man killed in Garrett's barn wasn't John Wilkes Booth at all? What if the celebrated actor, the symbol of defiant Confederate vengeance, had somehow slipped through the grasp of his pursuers, vanishing into the vast, fractured landscape of post-Civil War America, living out his days in anonymity while the nation mourned a ghost? This wasn't merely the fanciful musing of conspiracy theorists. It was a doubt that gnawed at many who witnessed the immediate aftermath. The identification of the body was fraught with inconsistencies. Initially, the corpse was so disfigured from its rough handling and the gunshot wound that definitive identification was challenging. While Booth's distinctive broken leg, sustained in his leap from Lincoln's box, was noted, other identified marks, like a scar above his left eye, were either overlooked or simply not present on the dead man. The entire process was rushed, almost secretive. The body was swiftly taken aboard the ironclad USS Montauk, subjected to a cursory autopsy, and then unceremoniously buried at sea, only to be disinterred later for a more private burial on federal land. The lack of a public viewing, the haste, the secrecy, it all fueled the nascent suspicion that something was amiss. The very idea of a government cover-up, a deliberate deception at the highest levels, seems almost unthinkable in the retelling of such a pivotal moment. Yet the chaos of Reconstruction, the lingering bitterness between North and South, and the sheer political volatility of the era provided fertile ground for such a possibility. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, a man known for his iron will and absolute control, orchestrated the entire manhunt and the subsequent investigation. His motives for ensuring a swift, decisive end to the Booth saga are understandable. A living Booth, a captured Booth, meant a public trial, a platform for his defiant rhetoric, and a potential unearthing of uncomfortable truths about the wider conspiracy. A dead Booth, however, closed the door on further inquiry, allowing the nation to move forward however shakily. But the whispers persisted, growing louder over the decades. Stories began to surface of sightings, of encounters with a man bearing an uncanny resemblance to John Wilkes Booth, a man who possessed the actor's distinctive mannerisms, his physical traits, even his notorious limp. These weren't isolated incidents. They stretched across the American frontier, from the dusty plains of Texas to the burgeoning cities of California, even reaching as far as Canada. Each sighting, each hushed conversation, added another thread to the intricate tapestry of an alternative history, a history where the assassin had cheated the hangman. One of the most compelling and enduring of these claims centered around a man known as John St. Helen, who worked as a bartender in Glen Rose, Texas, in the 1870s. St. Helen was said to possess an intimate knowledge of theatrical life, an aristocratic bearing, and a peculiar limp. Crucially, he often drank heavily, and when in his cups, would reportedly confess to being John Wilkes Booth, haunted by his past. Witnesses claimed he spoke of the Lincoln assassination with chilling detail and an almost theatrical flair. He even bore a scar consistent with one Booth was known to have on his neck. When federal marshals, alerted by these rumors, began to close in, St. Helen vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a growing conviction among locals that they had harbored the infamous assassin. Then came the extraordinary tale of David E. George. In January 1903, in Enid, Oklahoma, a man named David E. George committed suicide by poison. Before his death, George allegedly confessed to an attorney, Finis Bates, that he was in fact John Wilkes Booth. Bates, intrigued, arranged for the body to be embalmed and preserved, convinced he was holding a historical bombshell. Bates, a former Confederate officer, claimed that George possessed a broken leg, a scar above his eye, and teeth that precisely matched Booth's dental records. The body, preserved with arsenic, became a macabre curiosity, touring the country in a glass-topped coffin, exhibited as the mummified remains of John Wilkes Booth, the man who had truly escaped. The motivations behind such an elaborate cover-up, if it indeed occurred, are multi-layered and deeply unsettling. Beyond the immediate need to close the case and quell national unrest, some theories suggest a far more sinister agenda. What if Booth was merely a pawn in a larger conspiracy, a useful idiot whose death was essential to protect more powerful individuals? Secretary Stanton himself, a man of immense power, had been a vocal critic of Lincoln before becoming his ally. His almost dictatorial control over the investigation, the suppression of certain witnesses, and the alleged disappearance of key evidence, such as pages from Booth's diary, all fuel suspicions that he might have been involved, or at least privy to a deeper plot. The missing diary pages remain a particularly tantalizing piece of the puzzle. Booth's diary, recovered by Stanton, was found to have 18 pages torn out. What secrets did those pages hold? Did they implicate high-ranking officials? Did they reveal Booth's true co-conspirators, individuals whose exposure would have plunged the fragile Union into further chaos? Stanton claimed the pages were irrelevant, but their absence has haunted historians and researchers for generations, leading many to believe they contained evidence too explosive for public consumption. Consider the political climate of 1865. President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, was deeply unpopular and faced impeachment proceedings just a few years later. The idea that a powerful faction within the government might have sought to control the narrative, to prevent any further destabilization of the nation by revealing a deeper, more pervasive conspiracy, is not entirely far-fetched. A living Booth put on trial could have implicated anyone, from disgruntled Northern Copperheads to high-ranking Confederate sympathizers still lurking in the shadows of Washington. His death, whether real or fabricated, served to sever those potential connections, ensuring a more manageable, if less truthful, resolution. The arguments for Booth's survival are not without their counterpoints, of course. Forensic experts have, at various times, examined the remains alleged to be Booth's and offered conflicting conclusions. The official records, though questioned, remain the bedrock of the historical narrative. Yet the sheer volume of anecdotal evidence, the consistent descriptions from multiple unconnected witnesses, and the enduring questions surrounding the handling of the original investigation, refuse to be silenced. The enduring mystery of John Wilkes Booth's true fate challenges us to look beyond the accepted narrative, to question the tidy conclusions presented by those in power. It invites us to consider the possibility that history, particularly in moments of profound crisis, can be shaped, manipulated, and even deliberately obscured. Was the man shot in Garrett's barn truly the infamous assassin, or was he a convenient substitute, allowing the real Booth to slip away, a ghost in the annals of American history? The evidence, the whispers, the tantalizing clues, remain, inviting us to weigh them for ourselves, and perhaps to uncover a truth far more complex and mind-blowing than the official story dares to tell. The question of Booth's survival isn't just about one man, it's about the very nature of truth, power, and the stories we choose to believe. Thanks for watching Study Z. Remember to subscribe for more deep dives.